James Thompson, a former professional boxer turned delivery driver, navigates the rain-soaked streets of Seattle in his weathered Honda Pilot. 2 years have passed since a doctor's warning about concussions ended his boxing career, forcing him into the gig economy to support himself and his sister Sarah, who's studying nursing. Tonight's delivery is unusual. $347.50 worth of sushi and sake to the exclusive Hillcrest Heights Country Club. The massive tip alone exceeds what most customers give him in a month. As James approaches the ornate gates, he encounters the first sign of trouble: a dismissive security guard who barely acknowledges his existence, treating him with the casual contempt reserved for service workers. Following directions to the tennis courts, James discovers a disturbing scene. 5 wealthy young men, led by the handsome and entitled Bradley Morrison, are systematically humiliating Miguel Santos, an older Hispanic groundskeeper. They're throwing tennis balls at him as he tries to collect equipment, turning his work into their entertainment. The cruelty is calculated, performed for an audience, a display of power over someone they consider beneath them. James recognizes the dynamic immediately. He's witnessed this type of casual brutality before, both in his childhood neighborhood and in his current work. But seeing it here, in this temple to privilege, surrounded by manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than he makes in months, strikes him as particularly obscene. Page 2. The confrontation begins. When James approaches to deliver the food, Bradley Morrison's attention shifts to this new target. The young man's demeanor changes instantly upon seeing James's delivery uniform and ethnicity. His expression reveals the practiced dismissal of someone who has never had to consider service workers as fully human. What begins as a simple transaction quickly escalates into something far more sinister. Bradley refuses to simply accept the delivery, instead launching into a performance designed to humiliate James in front of his friends. He questions James's professionalism, suggests the food has been contaminated, and makes increasingly racist implications about James's work ethic and character. The other young men form a loose circle, sensing entertainment. The groundskeeper quietly disappears, recognizing the danger and wanting no part of the escalating situation. James finds himself trapped between his need for the income. If Bradley refuses the prepaid order, James will have to cover the $347.50 himself. Bradley's accusations become more elaborate and vicious. He claims James has contaminated the food through negligence, that he's been irresponsible with the delivery, that he represents everything wrong with service workers who don't take their jobs seriously. Each accusation is designed to strip away James's humanity, to reduce him to a stereotype that Bradley and his friends can mock without conscience. Page 3. The humiliation and the breaking point. The situation reaches its nadir when Bradley opens a container of sushi and hurls it directly at James's chest, covering his uniform with expensive food, while claiming it was contaminated and needed to be disposed of properly. His friends erupt in laughter at this calculated assault, treating James's humiliation as high entertainment. But Bradley isn't finished. He demands that James clean himself, not with towels or in a restroom, but by kneeling in a muddy puddle of rainwater that has collected near the tennis court. The demand is explicitly designed to be degrading, to force James into a position of submission that will satisfy Bradley's need for complete dominance. As James kneels by the puddle, feeling the cold, dirty water soak through his clothes, something fundamental shifts inside him. He realizes that Bradley is positioning himself for the ultimate humiliation, forcing James to put his face in the muddy water. But in that moment of apparent defeat, James remembers who he was before he became a delivery driver. He begins to speak, calmly telling Bradley about his boxing career. Golden Gloves champion twice, professionally undefeated in his weight class. More importantly, he explains what boxing taught him, how to read opponents, how to recognize when someone has never faced real consequences, and how to identify the exact moment when an overconfident adversary makes a critical mistake. The reversal. James slowly stands from the muddy puddle, and everything changes. His posture, his voice, his entire presence transforms from that of a submissive service worker to something far more dangerous. He begins explaining the reality of power, not the artificial power that comes from money and social position, but the real power that emerges when everything else is stripped away. Bradley, who has never faced genuine consequences for his actions, suddenly finds himself in completely unfamiliar territory. James methodically dismantles the young man's assumptions about control and dominance, explaining that Bradley's worst nightmare isn't physical violence, it's social media exposure that would destroy his reputation permanently. The confrontation becomes a masterclass in psychological warfare. James offers Bradley two choices: call the police and try to have him arrested, while explaining how security footage would reveal who really assaulted whom, or pay for the food, apologize sincerely, and learn something about treating people with basic human dignity. Faced with the prospect of viral humiliation and public exposure of his behavior, Bradley crumbles. He pays James the full amount and delivers a stammering apology, not just for the immediate incident, but for his entire pattern of treating service workers as subhuman entertainment. His friends, equally shaken by this reversal of power dynamics, quickly agree to change their own behavior. Page 5. The immediate aftermath and viral impact. As James drives away from the country club, he discovers that someone, likely a club employee who witnessed the confrontation, has leaked security footage of the incident. The video goes viral within hours, sparking widespread outrage about the treatment of service workers and the entitled behavior of wealthy young men who face no consequences for their cruelty. The response is overwhelming. James receives dozens of messages from reporters wanting interviews, potential employers offering better jobs, and ordinary people thanking him for standing up to casual workplace abuse. His delivery company calls not to fire him, but to offer a commendation and a raise, recognizing that his actions represent their drivers positively. Most significantly, Frank Williams from a local boxing gym reaches out. Frank has seen the video and recognizes something in James that goes beyond the immediate confrontation. He sees someone who understands that real strength isn't about dominating others, but about refusing to be dominated yourself. The gym offers James a position teaching young people not just boxing techniques, but the mental aspects of self-respect and dignity. It's a chance to transform his experience into something that can help others facing similar challenges, to teach kids how to stand up to bullies without becoming bullies themselves. 6 months later, James has found his new calling at Frank Williams' boxing gym. He splits his time between teaching teenagers like young Miguel, coincidentally sharing a name with the groundskeeper, and continuing part-time delivery work, not because he needs the money, but because he wants to stay connected to that world and remember what it feels like to be underestimated. The program James helps develop becomes a model for other cities, combining physical training with what they call dignity education, teaching young people how to recognize their own worth and demand appropriate treatment without resorting to aggression or cruelty. Perhaps most surprisingly, Bradley Morrison follows through on his promise to change. He implements new policies at the country club for treating service workers, funds scholarships for employees' children, and even writes to James to express genuine remorse and gratitude for the hard lesson he needed to learn. Miguel Santos, the groundskeeper, sends a letter thanking James for standing up that night, reporting that conditions at the club have genuinely improved and that he now feels respected rather than merely tolerated. The story concludes with James in his new role, teaching another generation that the most important battles aren't always won with fists, but with the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to accept treatment that denies your basic humanity. He's learned that dignity isn't something you wait for others to give you. It's something you claim for yourself, and in doing so, you make it easier for others to claim theirs. The rain that began the story continues to fall, but now it feels like renewal rather than burden, washing away old assumptions about power and worth, making space for a world where every person's dignity is recognized and protected, regardless of their job or social status.